Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining today. My name is Sagar Shukla, and I've got a special guest with me on this show, Ricky Patel, who is going to be joining us for the Value Lab today. Ricky, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sagar. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, today's conversation is going to be all about value frameworks. And if you remember from prior webinars that we've hosted, value frameworks are the latest way to understand customer value and to really start to measure that in a systematic way for your prospects, your customers, and your market. So today we're going to have Ricky talk to us about an example of how he's implemented a value framework at his company at Agreed. And so I'll let him introduce himself in a second. But I also want to say that we launched a certification program a couple months ago, and Ricky was one of the first practitioners who joined the certificate program to be an official enterprise value framework practitioner. So Ricky, thanks so much for being a part of that.
No worries. I still need to actually update my LinkedIn profile with a certificate, so I'll make sure I get that done this week as well.
Yeah, one step at a time. One step at a time. Awesome to hear. But in the meantime, Ricky, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the audience about?
Yeah, sure. Happy to go. So yeah, whilst you pull up those slides, Sagar. So as you said, well, my name is Ricky Patel. I'm based in a small town called Hawley, which is around 30 minutes south of London over here in the UK. A little bit about myself. So I spent the early part of my career on, let's call it the dark side, which was pre-sales. And then I made the jump over to customer success around 7 years ago. And I've had multiple roles in organizations of different maturities. And that's, I guess, what led me to my current role today, which is as a customer success director at Degreed. And we are a leading enterprise technology suite that uses a learner-centric approach to meet organizational skill needs through targeted upskilling. One constant that I've noted throughout my journey is that customer intimacy alone is not enough. Happy customers does not always equal successful customers. And I guess that's what brings me here today. Earlier this year, as Sagar mentioned, I was lucky enough to be part of the inaugural cohort of peers who passed through the Foresight Value Practitioner Program, led by Sagar and his colleague Nigel. And I found this advice very practical, and it was very useful when it came to building out our own strategy for building in a value framework at Degreed. And I'd highly recommend it to anyone who's going to be undergoing a similar exercise anytime soon. Yeah, and the last bullet point here, outside of work, it would be good to mention I'm here always talking about food, traveling, all my various sports teams. And in recent years, I've tried to mature with that sports thinking a little bit and taken a keen interest in sports psychology, how we can build those habits of elite athletes into everyday life. So yeah, that's me, and I'm looking forward to today's chat.
Awesome. And confirming you can see the screen?
Yep, it's all good now. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, we're going to get started with the presentation and a quick about me. So I am the co-founder and CEO of Foresight. We are a platform that helps companies measure and define customer value. My journey began at a Series A fintech company called DealCloud, which was Series A back in 2016. I was in post-sales and pre-sales roles and eventually helped grow the business through acquisition and IPO, and started Foresight with my co-founder Nigel, as Ricky mentioned, a couple years back. So outside of work, I love playing tennis, cooking, and performing. So with that, let's get into the good stuff. Okay, great. So core beliefs, I'd like to start off with that, which is that generating revenue for companies is the reason why we're talking about this, right? And it is a byproduct of delivering value. So value frameworks help you deliver value, but first you need to measure value, and realizing that value can only be defined by your customer. It's not defined by the company, right? You have to understand your customer's lens. And if you're not measuring value effectively, you're leaving revenue on the table, because value is really where that white space exists, really where that next level understanding of customer needs exists. And the goal of this is to help create a better way to track that. All right, so a slide here on measuring and delivering value. A lot of research done in the industry by our peers. Greg Baines is one of the key leaders in the space who's been doing a lot of work here. And what he found is that the fact that you can measure and deliver value actually improves customer lifespan. If you measure value and that result comes back negative, that customer will stay twice as
Mm.
long than if you didn't measure value in the first place. And of course, if that comes back as positive, that customer will stay 6x as long. So a lot of great understanding here of why we need to measure value in the first place.
Yeah, just to add a bit to that, Saga, I think this is probably one of the most important slides that we're showing today. It basically just shows the negative consequences of inaction, right? And if there's realistically one takeaway for anyone to take from today, it's just ensure that we're having these conversations with every single one of your clients. You know, it's just a vendor that goes quiet on value alignment can easily be replaced or removed from the tech stack. So yeah, totally agree.
All right, so let's go back to it. What is not value? Right? To understand how to measure it, we have to understand how it fits into your overall ecosystem. Value is not usage. It's not engagement. It's not your health score, right? It's different. These are all internal metrics of customer engagement and how you feel as a CSM, the customer might be feeling. But how the customer is actually feeling, their perception, their sentiment is in their minds. And so it's important to track that. I want to call out that value can be a component of your health score, but it's different, right? A lot of organizations are tracking usage today, engagement, that's the CSM sentiment, maybe you're doing CSAT, etc. Value realization, which is all about business outcomes, is altogether separate. And that's where we need to connect the dots here. All right, so how do we define customer value? Ricky, did you have anything to add there? You're shaking your head.
No, yeah, just in agreement. I don't think we're not saying here don't measure things like usage and engagement. It just is a component of overall health, and it's what leads to the value, right? Rather than the gold standard itself.
Yes, exactly. 100%. So the way to define customer value is through a pillared approach. And this is a framework that Ricky went through as part of his certification to understand how do you think about the components and the building blocks of customer value. And the very top are the desired outcomes, right? This is where it all begins. How do your economic and executive buyers think about your solution in the context of their business? What are they trying to achieve? What are their biggest goals for the year? And we need to document those, right? Document them very clearly to help them achieve it with your product. The next layer down are the specific business workflows that your customer has, right? And these are where champions and end users are working to help support the executive buyer achieve those outcomes. And this is where your product comes in. The product workflows that help enable, that can impact, or even change your customers' business workflows. That's an important part, the change, right? Change management. We'll come back to that. And the third and final layer is your product use cases. This is what your product makes possible for your customer. This alone can't get you to the top of the pyramid because you need to understand the workflows and the outcomes. But it is obviously where everything begins because you're delivering a product to help customers do this. And this maps very well to the types of buyers that you have in an organization. So at the top, we've got the EBs, the strategics, the CXOs, the decision makers, the budget holders, right? These folks have money, budget, and they're determining whether to buy, renew, or cancel the relationship with you. And supporting them are the champions, right? The leaders, the VPs, the directors who have to drive initiatives forward to make sure that the champion or that the strategic can achieve their desired outcomes. And at the core foundational level are your users. These are the folks actually clicking into a software, looking at a dashboard, migrating data, and driving the adoption of your solution. So all three of these personas are really critical to understand value holistically. But typically what organizations are doing today, and in my prior life, I'm sure Ricky, in your prior life as well, you're often at the end user level but not necessarily at the champion level or the executive buyer level. That's where we're lost, right? We get this chasm between what we think is going on and what is actually going on. Cool. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ricky for an example from Degreed and how he's actually thinking about this in the context of his organization.
Yeah, no, thanks, Saga. And you know, as we've kind of alluded to a little bit, there seems to be a lot of theory available out there at the moment. So we thought it would be a good idea to go through the real world example of implementing a value framework strategy at our organization at Degreed. And I wanted to start right from the beginning and address the question of why we're doing this in the first place. And I'm sure anyone who's watching this can relate from my perspective, but from all your perspectives as well. Customer success especially is an inherently busy and noisy profession, and what it can do is leave too much time being spent on tactical endeavors which don't really move the needle, and not enough time being spent on the kind of delivery of the big strategic why that links your solution back to the business objective of the client. And to me, that's what we really should be measured against as professionals in this space. But this is where I think the value realization framework can be really impactful. It's gonna allow us to operationalize the value cycle all the way from discovery, delivery, through to realization, whilst having the ability to track those outcomes at scale. And the real beauty of this framework is that it's mutually beneficial to all of the stakeholders involved. So there's benefits for the client, there's benefits for the organization, in this case, Degreed, and there's benefits for the customer success or the account teams as well. And so I just wanted to go through a few of those benefits. And to start with, I mean, the client benefits should be pretty obvious, but we do, as Sago alluded to a little bit in the previous slide, we sometimes take it for granted that all of our client stakeholders automatically know what good looks like and how they can get there. And especially when they work for these kind of large, complex organizations. And we've definitely found it difficult to start with a blank success plan, go into a conversation, and then come out of that conversation with the 2, 3, 4 strategic outcomes to target. What this framework does is it gives us almost a pick list of objectives where we know other clients are already seeing success, and then we can select the one that resonates most to that client. And then once we pick that objective, we can then use our playbooks to give us step-by-step guidance on how to achieve that desired outcome, which in turn speeds up their kind of level of maturity in terms of use case optimization. This then, of course, leads to benefits for our organization. And obviously the main one is an increase in retention and expansion opportunities. Because of course, a client who is achieving their objectives and seeing true success measures being achieved on their side is most likely to be a long-term advocate of our product suite. And of course, that will lead to commercial benefits in the longer run. But another more intangible benefit of this framework is that it should serve to unify the narrative, the cross-functional narrative across our organization on how we provide customer value throughout the whole customer journey. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit more later in the deck. But finally, the final group that benefits from this is the customer success professionals themselves on the front line. The first thing is the framework and the enablement should equip the customer success professionals with the tools that they need to have those, strategic conversations, which should hopefully elevate them from being just another vendor contact to being a trusted partner. I also think it will help undo silos. So as we spoke about earlier, it is a very busy profession, and it's easy to sit on your own island all day with your own clients, with your own best practices. And hey, I've got nothing against islands. I live in the UK, but we know that this leaves us isolated. So one of the aims of this framework is to provide a repeatable, scalable best practices that can be leveraged by CSMs, by any CSM with any client. And last but definitely not least, tracking progression towards those outcomes will will allow us to more quickly and more accurately identify and remedy client risk, which is obviously beneficial to the business again.
That's huge, Ricky. And one thing I wanted to call out is the silos, because I feel like this is the biggest challenge that prevents customers from getting more value and what leads to churn and blindsided cancellations, right? Because it's not a continuous experience for the customer. The customer doesn't look at their relationship with you through sales, product, marketing, customer success, account management, support, right? They look at it as one monolith. Are you helping me or are you not?
Mm.
Because if you're not helping me, somebody else will, and see you later. So we have to present ourselves as a monolith, not as silos. Internally, we need the silos for efficiency and yada yada. Great. We get it, right? But externally, we cannot have that because a customer needs that streamlined, continuous flow. And I think what you really hit on here is the value framework for you, how you're thinking about it can create that unified cross-functional narrative, right? That's so huge. And I wanted to call that out because I'm hearing this all the time from leaders who are struggling, but it's because they're projecting their internal silos rather than the unified narrative.
Exactly. Nail on the head. And you want that kind of experience, that unified experience to carry on throughout that whole customer journey, right? From the moment they interact with the website for the first time all the way through to getting towards that renewal stage conversation. We're hoping that the narrative has been the same all the way through, that we are here to help you achieve your goal, which is X. That's
Absolutely.
where we need to be.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Okay, so so I thought we wanted to dive a little bit deeper, and what I wanted to highlight here is that we're still very much at that kind of infancy stage of rolling out this framework at Degreed. In fact, we're still at the planning stage, but we do have a defined set of objectives and timeline in place, which we've used to build out our project methodology. And here are some of the key deliverables that we'll be targeting. I thought it would be a good opportunity to share these, as I think they're kind of practically applicable to anyone who's thinking of undergoing a similar exercise at their orgs. But in no particular order, this first box is we need to understand our own business. And alluding to that conversation we just had again, importantly, we're working cross-functionally to pull together the 5, 6, 7 different outcomes that we know our product suite can deliver for clients based on previous experiences, existing metrics, customer testimonials, and knowledge from the account team, etc. And luckily, because we already had strong executive sponsorship for this project, gaining that cross-functional buy-in has not been too difficult in our case. The next box, I've labeled it as jobs to be done, but what we then need to do is, once we've worked out those outcomes, is pull together those use cases or work streams, metrics, jobs to be done, and that need to be ticked off to deliver on those outcomes that we've just finalized. And to me, this is probably the most time-consuming part, because we want to make it as easy as possible for our internal and external stakeholders to achieve their outcomes. For this, we're going to need to create playbooks that not only cover product functionality, but also provide guidance for the client from a change management perspective on how we can gain their buy-in for the new ways of working. And I think this is truly vital, because just switching on new functionality alone is not going to be enough. Without enablement and correct positioning within the client org, value realization becomes very difficult. And the final 2 buckets, sorry, Zach, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to add in there, that's a really good point, is the product can only get you so far,
Mm-hmm.
right? You need to have the change management capabilities to help ensure that the product is mapping to workflows. Because if the workflows aren't right, the product can't solve that. Like, it can help the correct workflows, but you have to do some surgery or some therapy on the workflows themselves with your customer to get that on the happy path, and then embed the product onto those. So I think that's really good to work backwards from the work streams, align to the jobs to be done, and make that at the forefront, right? Your product is in the context of the change management, and it has to be both in tandem. So, sorry to butt in, but that was a great point.
No, that's perfect. I mean, we still don't know. There's not many products that can say they are the silver bullet, just switch it on and they will come, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the enablement and the messaging that needs to happen at client org to make value realization possible. So totally agree. Final two buckets that I'll quickly touch on. We've already spoken a little bit about this, but it's revisiting the full customer journey. In the longer term, we're going to need to align the full customer journey with the framework. And this is where that cross-functional sponsorship is vital again. To become a true value-driving org, ideally, to me, the marketing decks, the sales pitches, the feature enhancements all need to align with these known outcomes. But as that's a longer term thing, the starting point we're going to be looking at, the quick wins for us are redesigning success plans and redesigning EBRs so that our new framework would allow us to speak to the value conversation at regular intervals throughout the post sales journey. And finally, last but not least at all, it's a very important bucket actually, is optimization of our CRM. So once we've got these outcomes, it's then vital to log and track value realization across our book of business. And what we can then do is align our health scores to this metric as well. So if value realization or value attainment makes a big component of our health scores, I think your health scores become more powerful metric to look at. And as we both alluded to throughout this conversation, verified outcomes can be one of, if not the most predictive indicator of client health and commercial potential that we have. So having a CRM that's optimized to log this and report on this will be vital to global forecasting going forward.
And I like how you talked about the client health here because value is a component of it. And it's different than usage, it's different than the other components you have, but it can be such a powerful leading indicator of renewal, expansion, and overall relationship health because executive buyers and champions are involved. So a couple quick questions. Tom, who has left a comment on the chat, has a question. I'd love to address this first, and then I have a question for you. So Tom's question is, for the where we deliver section, did those measurements come from different places, or do all teams use a single source of truth?
It's a good question. Thanks, Tom. Not an easy one to answer. I think it's mainly through, I would actually say it's more the different places comment, because all of the teams have had different experiences with clients. The product team is building the product towards some objectives and outcomes. The client team has had their experiences. We've got metrics and customer testimonials to say that we've achieved outcomes in different areas. So the exercise was more around kind of talking to all of the cross-functional departments in the business and compiling all of this together and creating what you're talking about, which is that single source of truth. And hopefully going forward, that single source of truth is what we use throughout the functions to say, these are the objectives where we know we are successful. So I think it's more of the previous approach where we've had to kind of gather that information and then put it into one place.
Got it. You kind of answered my question as well, which is what are some of the challenges that you face doing this? And I think having a bunch of different metrics and KPIs and data points across your organization is a hard thing to wrangle up. But this is a great exercise to bring it together.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's go to an example. I would love to have you talk about what the framework looked like for you.
And thanks, Aga. And just to put a big old caveat onto this, we're only around like 2 weeks into our project and our journey into creating this value framework. So what I've done here is I've used some work that my colleague Jen Stewart put together on one of our known outcomes, and I've pulled it together in a nice little visual based on that hierarchy pyramid that you were showing earlier. And what this simply shows is that we've broken down one of our desired outcomes into workflows, KPIs, and jobs to be done. And in this case, we have an outcome that directly ties into client's business objective of reducing the time to productivity of a new hire, which obviously saves cost in the long run. One of the associated workflows for this would be the onboarding workflow, where we can look to measure KPIs such as time saved in completing onboarding compared to previous initiatives. And then all of this is propped up by a variety of product functionality that we could leverage in app, including things like onboarding journeys, curated upskilling content, automated nudging. And again, alongside all of this, we'd need to provide that change management best practices so that the client could take this on board and ensure adoption of the new initiative. So, of course, this is just one of the frameworks that we're working on for our org. We'll most likely end up with 5 or 6 or maybe 7 different desired outcomes that we'll need to build this out for. And as I said, the next part is the time-consuming part, which is putting together the guides and the playbooks. But this will give us this kind of gives us a nice overview of what we've achieved so far in the few weeks that we've had this project live.
And how has this exercise helped you map out the rest of the framework, right? Because there's I can imagine a map of all the different use cases, all the different workflows, the desired outcomes. So do you have a structure in place to do that, or how are you thinking about filling out the rest of that map?
At this stage of the project, what we're doing is basically information gathering, and the next stage for us would be to build it into the framework. But what I think this has done is given us kind of the clear kind of definitions of what information we need to pull together at this stage before we start putting it into that kind of structured flow that we could enable our CSMs to go into conversations with.
Got it. That makes sense. And that's probably a lot of interviews internally and looking at all the metrics and the data sources you mentioned.
Exactly. And we can touch base on this in maybe 2 months' time, and I can give you a more rounded picture on that.
For sure. Awesome. Well, I want to talk about a couple other components of how to put this into practice and hit on one thing you said earlier, which is redesigning the customer journey. And I feel oftentimes organizations are thinking about it similar to the way they think about health scores today, which is internally biased a little bit, right? What are the checkpoints we need to hit for our customer to make them successful in our mind? And I think what I've been learning from you, and also what the value framework helps enable, is view the world from your customer's lens. What do they need to achieve their outcomes? And if we reframe some of that, the value framework and actually measuring value can be super powerful when you do this from the initial sales process. So during the sales discovery, demo, motion, when your AEs are going out and having conversations with new prospects, it's a great way to measure value. We'll talk about how we can actually do that in a second. But after you have the deal get closed, you might need to do a pilot in between. That's another great use case, pre and post pilot, how much value was created, right? And leverage the value framework as a way of understanding what was the benchmark baseline, how that grew over time. Awesome. It grew a lot. Close a pilot. You're officially onboarding. So now you're initiating value formally, right? I like to call the sales pilot phase, the introducing value. The onboarding is initiating value. And once you are onboarded, it's time for change management, making sure you work back from those workflows and align your product use cases to that. Change management is so critical. That's where value realization happens, adoption happens, and sets you up for a really solid renewal call, which is where we have to prove the value and show where do we go the past 6, 9, 12 months. How did that benchmark score grow from a 20 out of 100 value score to a 60 to a 75 to an 80, right? And so it's really important to embed this value framework measurement across the journey, across the value journey of how your customer looks at the world. All right, so let's talk about how to measure this. And would like to give you, the listener, 2 tangible ways you can think about this. And the first one is a value assessment, right? So this is one of the ways that Foresight delivers value as well. So caveat there, right? Foresight has a value assessment, but there's other ways you can do this as well. So I'm going to talk about this in generic terms, and then also what Foresight can do here. So the value assessment is a 3 to 5 minute personalized questionnaire. It's built off of that data model, that framework of outcomes, workflows, and jobs to be done, product use cases. This is sent to exec buyers, champions, and users. Again, the three stakeholders on the pyramid, ahead of each of those points on the prior slide, right? Pilot, onboarding, account review, renewal. So get a perception of how EBs, champions, and users perceive your solution through the value lens at key junctures in their value journey. Quantify that, store it, use it to drive action. And assessments get a really high response rate. So on the Foresight side, this is part of our product. We've measured engagement rates for this, and we get 70% response rates, which is amazing. So executive buyers who typically may not be engaged after the sale, right? That happens all the time. Engaging them through the lens of a value assessment, it takes a couple minutes of their time. It's personalized to their needs and their business workflows and worldview. Gets them to get engaged and drives initiation of them into the process. So that's one way to do it. Value assessments. The second way, and this is something that we're actively exploring, and we've generated really cool results for our customers, but we're seeing other customers do this as well, is call transcripts. So imagine now, right? You've got sales, account executives having all their conversations in Gong. They're having a lot of discovery calls and having a lot of demos. Well, imagine being able to parse all the value data out through AI, categorize it, and say, what are the outcomes that the customer self-reported in the call? What do the champions say is their biggest pain point? What are the workflows that the end user is struggling with today? We can passively scrape all that, put that into a data model, and give you specific actions to take in pilot, in onboarding, in QBRs, and before renewal to ensure you're aligning to the outcomes and increasing value. Also, this can happen on the post-sales side. Account managers, CSMs, CS engineers, whoever's having conversations with the customer, if you're recording those, awesome opportunity to do the same thing, parse it out, put it into the data model, and leverage that to drive more value. So wanted to give you 2 actionable ways to do this. And to summarize, it all begins with the framework, identify and articulate the dimensions of value. Ricky has done a great job of showing us what that could look like at a real company. And then we have to measure that framework at key junctures through various means, assessments, call recordings, etc. So there's a tried and proven way to do this, and I wanted to end the session today with a case study of how this actually works. Rick, anything you wanted to add in there before I kept going?
No, I think it's great. I think it's fantastic, especially most of the time the metrics that we need to measure we don't have firsthand. So getting that kind of executive sentiment of tracking towards the verified outcomes is vital.
Awesome. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but if you have questions, audience, thank you, Tom, for sending a question. This is the time. Please engage any comments or questions you have. We'll be sure to hit them right after we end the slides here. But for an example, right, of driving revenue outcomes, because at the end of the day, what matters? We got to get dollars on the door. We first need to deliver value. So we did a value framework with a enterprise publicly traded financial services company. So I've anonymized them, but this is a case study we actually put together based off our product usage and to show the impact of what this can have, right? And the why. So this enterprise fintech, they had 83 customers, which represented 25 million in account value. So large, big deals. And they went through this value framework, identified the hierarchy, they assess their stakeholders across the journey. And what they were able to realize is that 40%, 47% of those 83 enterprise customers had untapped revenue opportunities, right? There were upsells waiting to be closed. There were more adoption consumption demand that wasn't being driven in the change management today. Customers wanted more because they identified needs that were unmet and the solution could support those. So huge. It also identified that some of these customers were happy, right? That was protected revenue. Great. So that's all bucketed in the 47%. What this also found was 16% of those 83 customers self-reported churn. And this was total net new unknown churn, right? Would have been blindsided cancellations. But what the value framework understood is that some of the key outcomes were not being met, were not being perceived to be driven. And so the executive buyers were not happy, champions were not happy, and they were looking to churn. They actually self-reported in the assessments that they were looking to another solution. So it's a really powerful process to protect revenue, expand revenue, close new deals, protect and make sure you close all the leaks in the bucket, because you may not know of certain customers who are looking to churn because you haven't asked them about certain things, and make sure you fortify the house, right? So 2 components there. And the last piece I'll end on here is a real anecdote from one of the end users, right, of our customers. So they're executive buyer, and this was a financial institution managing partner. Basically, what this individual said is, I want to be more engaged. I love to see how the team is leveraging the technology. I want to be more involved, and I'm eager to support, right? That's the goal, is to have engaged executive buyers. And that's the power of implementing a value framework, of measuring value, and realizing value on the back end. So I'm going to stop there with my my monologue, but would love to turn it back over to you, Ricky, for any closing thoughts you have.
No, I think that's great, Saga. You've covered everything. I think to me, it kind of just it wraps up, and everything that we've spoken about today, in my opinion, just takes out that kind of inertia and removes some kind of difficulty from all stakeholders, the client, the organization, the CSMs, around having that value conversation, right? And sometimes it can be the taboo subject, a difficult subject to have, but it's a very important subject. So what we're doing is putting the framework in place and the kind of the easy stepping stones in place to start having that conversation, measuring against it, and then hopefully seeing the positive results that you've just been showing through the example there.
Absolutely. I appreciate you saying that, and I'm excited for your journey here to implement this. And we got to touch base in a couple months to see how
Definitely.
it's going for you.
Definitely.
And for anyone who is interested in implementing a value framework or getting certified in our next cohort, we are launching our next cohort of enterprise value framework practitioners in May. So please comment here if you're interested. I'll make sure you get on the list. Also, feel free to connect me on LinkedIn and we can go from there. But that is an offer on the table. We want the next cohort of professionals who are looking to implement value frameworks into the organization. We're here to help and support you along your journey.
Yeah, highly recommended.
Well, Ricky, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for putting all this time and effort in, and I wish you all the best, man, with the value framework internally. I think you're up to some really strong, really good work that's needed, and I hope that it becomes a pioneering initiative, and I know it will. I already know.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. I'll definitely keep in touch. We've got a great team together on this project who all seem to get it. They all understand the importance of the value framework and how it can be beneficial to our business. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing how it comes to fruition over the next couple of months.
Awesome. Great. Well, we will close it out today, and we will be back in 2 weeks with another edition of the Value Lab, introducing additional participants who've been a member of our cohort, and we're going to go through a similar exercise. Ricky's our pioneering one here too. So thank you so much. Kicking it off for us. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate you joining.
Everyone. Thank you.
Comment below and we'll get you in the next cohort.